All right, what's up, everybody?
Hey,
How's it going, guys? Welcome to this very special episode of Borderlands and Beyond. My name is Misa Ramirez. I am the creator of Craft Cultura, and I'll be your host today. We have a very special topic today, special guest. Today's conversation is going to be Mexican American Studies in conversation with the Hemisphere. And helping guide and facilitate this discussion is my older brother, Craft Cultura's advisor, and as of recent, Dr. Christian Ramirez. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hey everybody, Dr. Ramirez, and like you help through some of the themes and questions that we have. So I'm happy to do the conversation.
Yeah, and as we want some three takeaways from this conversation before we introduce our special guest today. We want, who is Dr. Alvarez? Share a bit of her story. How do we engage Mexican American studies, ethnic studies with the world, and how do we bridge this discipline with the community? So, with that being said, it is Super Bowl Sunday, but we have two champions of their own, and they're two brilliant minds for the price of none. But you can donate as well so that we can have more conversations like this, and we'll put the link below just in case you want to donate. Because I think these conversations are very important to have in our community, and that's what Craft Cultura attempts to do, is make these conversations accessible and culturally relevant. So without further ado, let me introduce our special guest, a prolific educator, a social justice champion, a loving spirit, and I think everybody's like academic tia, Dr. Stephanie Alvarez. She is the director of the Center for Mexican American Studies. She's been a faculty member at UTPA, UTRGV for 15 years, and she's worked collectively with a group of Junior Latina faculty members and students to revive the Mosque program and establish the Center for Mexican American Studies. She's dedicated her entire professional career to ensure that Latinx students across the board have access to a linguistically and culturally affirming education. And in her free time, she enjoys volunteering as a coach in the City of San Juan for her three kids' various sports teams. So with that being said, welcome, Dr. Alvarez, or Coach Alvarez. Welcome to the show, and thank you for sharing your time with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here and happy to see both of you. I haven't seen you both in a long time since this pandemic started. So it's really nice to be here. And I'm happy, especially to be able to say congratulations to Christian face to face, although not in person, on recently defending his dissertation and getting his doctoral degree. So happy for you and your family.
Well, thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Thank you, and I'm here because of you and the faculty team at what was UTPA and Mosque, right? Without Mexican American Studies, this academic journey wouldn't have happened. So thank you all, and again, I'm really looking forward to having this discussion and seeing you for the first time in a long time. It's really cool.
Yeah, thank you, Doc. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate you. And so, yeah, how has it? What's up, Santi? Yes, he made it. Another yes, little Santi. How you been holding up during this pandemic now that we're going into
I miss you.
Miss you too, dude.
Yeah, I locked the door. I think he picked the lock. But
I am a thief.
So things have been okay. It's hard. I've realized during this pandemic that I really am a teacher and miss being in the classroom. There's a lot of. You need to ask your papi.
No,
Okay,
can I switch my account to TV14?
Yes. I know online learning is helping during the pandemic, so kids and students can keep up with their learning, and I realize it's helpful for some. For me, as a teacher, I feel like I'm a teacher. I know we call ourselves professors in the academy, but as a teacher, as an educator, I feel like education is very disembodied when we do it online, and it's helpful in some aspects, but I realized, I didn't go into this profession to not be face to face and in the classroom and having those meaningful conversations in person, because there's just things that happen in person that can't happen online. And I can't wait to get back in the classroom. So I hope people keep taking safety precautions, keep social distancing, keep wearing those masks. Let's get these vaccines rolled out, and work with everybody to stay safe so that everyone can get back to their normal lives. So it's one thing it's shown me is, I know what I'm supposed to do with my life, and that's to work in education in some way, but to do it in person.
Right. And I can't even imagine, you're such a hands-on, in the community educator. So I'm sure this has, made you adjust in creative ways. And that's why we wanted to have you as a guest as well, because we're all adjusting and we want to continue these combos. So thank you for being here again. And with that being said, Dr. A, you're now a Borderlands native. This is where you teach. This is where you're raising a family. This is where you build community. You come from the 305 to the 956.
Yes.
So, part of that story, that narrative. Can you take us back to the beginning? What was it like growing up in Miami?
Yeah. I've thought about this a lot because, I spent the first 18 years of my life in Miami, Florida, and now I've spent 15 years of my life in the 956. I've never spent more of my adult life in any place than the 956. But, I think it doesn't really matter where you spend your adult life. It's that place that raises you and nurtures you as a child that really makes probably the biggest impact in your life. And I made a conscious decision to stay here in the Valley and raise my children here in the Valley, because I think it, provides a special sense of place and culture for my children. And my partner, my husband, my children's father is from the Valley, and they have family here. But growing up in Miami is a interesting place for me, because I was raised by my father and my paternal grandparents, and they came over from Cuba and I'm an 80s child. I went to school in the 80s. And so one thing that happened in Miami's in the 80s was that you have the Mariel boat lift, where you have 100,000 Cubans come to the shores of Miami. And we were not welcomed. You had tent cities of refugees set up across the city, where refugees were put up in tents. They weren't allowed into the city. They were living there and processed there. You would have signs that said no fraternization with Cubans. There was a cover of Time magazine that said, with the state of Florida, that said, "Is paradise lost?" So in the 1960s, bilingual education actually started in Miami, Florida. But it was started with the intent of making sure Cuban Americans went back to Cuba and they still had their language, right? Of course, during the civil rights line after that, in Texas and Arizona, they would establish bilingual education for civil rights reasons. So Miami would be the birthplace of bilingual education, but in the 80s, it would also become the birthplace of the English-only movement. So it's this real dichotomy and this really tense period of time of the 80s, the Mariel boat lift, this sort of hatred towards Cubans, and the Reagan years, and when I'm going to school, and I graduate in 1992. And so the word that people would use is refugees, right? And then you would also have refugees from Central America coming as well, after the U.S. involvement in Central America. Or, every migrant from Latin America is really a result of a policy of the United States. And for people interested in that, there's a really great book called Harvest of Empire by Juan Gonzalez, who's actually a former young lord from the Puerto Rican movement, right? And it really details really well how really even Mexicanos, Dominicanos, Centroamericanos, Suramericanos that end up in the United States is really because of a policy of the United States that we end up here. And so, you know, I as a child, I internalized all of that. I mean, I couldn't intellectualize that then. I can intellectualize it now. But, you know, I really developed a sense of hatred of who I was, my language, you know, Spanish in particular, you know, my grandparents not being able to speak English, but I would always have to translate for them. I remember having to write things for my grandmother in the stores, write her checks, fill out paperwork, and you internalize that you're just not wanted, right? No matter what anyone tells you, it doesn't matter because everything you see tells you you're not wanted in the United States, even if you're born here, like in my case, even if you speak English, in my case. You know, I'm not sure which language I spoke first because I just know always speaking both. Because in my home, I spoke Spanish to my abuelos, but I spoke English to my dad because he didn't want me to not know how to speak English because he suffered so much, you know? So those were all things that I went through growing up in Miami and things that I brought with me to college as well. And, you know, I when I graduated high school, I mean, I don't say this with any sort of pride, but I never read a book, you know. I just never read a book. I mean, and I graduated a good student. I was an honors student. My dad always said I was smart because I was bilingual. So he told me that, and I believed him. So he would just tell me I was smart, and teachers would tell me I was smart. So I felt lucky. I was identified as smart. I also went to kindergarten twice, but you know, but so then there was that too. But so but that stuck with me. Like I graduated, but I never read a book, you know, but I hated to read. It was like the worst thing you could ever ask me to do was to read a book. But I got away with it. I mean, I'm sure all of you know, you go through high school and I don't know, I don't think much was asked of us, but somehow you make it through. And I made through with good grades. And then I remember going to college. I was just going through the motions because I just wanted to play basketball. I was a basketball player. I wanted to be a basketball coach or a PE teacher. And all of that changed for one reason or another. I just wanted to graduate quickly. I decided to major in Spanish only because it was a quick way out. I wanted to get my credits. But then I had to take a literature class. I was like, oh no, I got to read now. But then I got lucky. I read something and I was like, oh, this is actually good, right? I've read something that for the first time I identified with in my entire life, right? And it was by a Puerto Rican writer named Rosario Ferre. It was like a short story called La Muñeca Menor. You know, it was a feminist text. And then I was like, oh, like there's actually books out there that we can identify with. There was a woman, she spoke Spanish, you know, she had been through things like me. It wasn't Shakespeare, the Scarlet Letter, and yo no sé qué otras cosas that we were, you know, giving us that was like awful in high school. And, you know, and by accident, I feel like everything happened by accident, but I know it's never by accident, you know. I was like literally in that same class, this older woman was talking about getting a graduate degree and she was going to get an assistantship to go to get a graduate degree. And I'm like, what is that? And she's like, oh, they are going to pay me to go to school and I'm going to teach. I'm like, I want one of those. I want that. You know, I knew I always wanted to be an educator of some sort because, you know, coaching is PE teaching, it's education. I want that. So I started looking and I got accepted to a program. So that started my whole journey. And it wasn't until I was almost done with my PhD that I fell into Latinx literature. And I remember there was a class that they were offering in Nuevo Mexico on Chicano literature. And it was like a 1 week class, but you could get 3 credit hours. And I'm a big hustler, you know. I'm all about finish fast. How do I get my credits? I need to get out of here. And I said to the chair, can I take that for my Spanish degree? He said, oh, I don't see why not. He was Chicano. He's the only Chicano on the whole program. But then he came back and they said, well, the Spanish professor said no. He's like, they said it had nothing to do with Spanish. And then I was pissed because I'm a hustler. But then if you get me mad, I'm going to also get revenge. You know, bad way. But then I said, you know what? That's it. Everything I do from now on is going to be Chicanx, Latinx studies. And when I graduated, I was determined no one would ever leave my classroom without, you know, having a culturally and linguistically affirming education, because it was wrong. Like no one should ever have to go through what I did. And so, and we're a long ways from that. And so being here in the Valley now, you know, I see much of what I went through, of course, still happening, not just through my kids' eyes, but especially in the recent time. You know, back then we had the migration of a lot of Cuban Americans at the same time, but we have the migration of so many Centro Americanos coming and seeing what they're going through. Of course, it's a big difference because the Cubans were allowed and still allowed in, but now Cubans are being held back too during the Trump era. But there are many similarities, and the heightened anti-Latinx sentiment is reaching new proportions because of those rising numbers and because of the heightened white supremacy that's happened under the past administration. And we see that sort of, especially I think in the Valley, that sort of rising self-hate happening, you know, that we see with this last election, even though we know Trump didn't win in the Valley, but the concerning rise in the numbers of support against policies, against our own people is very concerning. And so I see the need for these programs more now than ever. So, you know, that's just sort of to show how really in 40 years from the 80s to the now 2020s, how little things have changed.
Right. No, and you know, we all have our stories on how you just shared how by luck it feels like sometimes how we stumbled across Mexican American studies. And for many students, including myself, you were that person that connected us to not only that academic discipline, but a world that we really didn't know existed. And I know majoring in Mosque, I always, and to this day, people always ask, what is that? What's Mexican American Studies? It was a lot like my name growing up, Misa. It was like, what is that? What does that mean? And that confusion, and almost like they want a different answer from you. And Mas it gave me direction to answer these questions, and not have to adjust to other folks. But what does that mean? That lack of awareness. Why do you think that Mexican American Studies, ethnic studies, is an academic discipline that many students and community members are still not aware about?
Well, I think that they're not aware about it because a lot of people are afraid of it, right? They're afraid of it because it hasn't been embedded into the traditional curriculum, right? And I think that fear shows, for example, I think this past Friday, an article came out that in Utah, there's a school district or a school, I can't remember, where they were giving students the option to opt out of Black History Month, right? So that shows the fear people have, right? You don't give students an option to opt out of the curriculum, the general curriculum, and that's a white-centered curriculum, right? So why are students given an option to opt out of Black History Month? So that tells me that that's fear. And so, you know, that means, and what do people fear? People fear the unknown, right? So people don't understand what Mexican American studies is. And part of the problem is, as an academic discipline, really the academic discipline is Chicanic studies, right? I mean, that's how it was founded. People use Mexican American studies really because, you know, it's easier for people to understand the word, right? It's easier for people to digest, but it was founded as Chicanic Studies. The organization from which you that coordinates it and meets on a yearly basis is Chicanic Studies. And so some people think, well, Chicanic Studies is just, looking at literature that's written by Chicanics or history that's about Chicanics. And that's one way to approach it. But then that's not Chicanic Studies, right? Chicanic Studies is specifically grounded in social justice and in community, and making a difference in the lives of the community through the study of the community itself and the cultural production of the community, the knowledge production of the community. And so people don't understand what they don't know. And so they fear it. And so we do need people that are willing to go in and sit down with people and educate, like through these things that you're doing here, because otherwise, we're just going to have more of the same. And so, there's, for example, we have now here in the Valley, we've had a couple of schools implementing Mexican American studies. And I was really glad to see McAllen ISD now is going to offer as electives, right? Mexican American studies and African American studies. But really that came from a push from young folks who had just recently graduated and formed the group, the Grande Narrative, to really push them to do that, So those are things that we need to see and we need to see more of.
Right. Shout out to the Grande Narrative and all those folks that have been pushing for decades, years, that behind the scenes work that a lot of people don't see. So Absolutely. Shout out to everybody, that's joining us live right now. Thank you. Whether you're on the Borderlands or beyond, feel free to drop a question, drop a comment. We're going to leave some time at the end so that Dr. Alvarez or Dr. Ramirez can answer those questions for you. So with that being said, Dr. A, take people inside the classroom. It's not this. Yes, we talk about real issues. Yes, we talk about transforming the world, but it's not this gloomy classroom setting. It's actually very fun. It's engaging. It's the reason that I stay up all night doing this. Like nerding out over these conversations and paint the picture for somebody that has never taken a Mosque course. And what's your favorite part about being a Mosque professor? Hello? I don't know if she heard me, if she's on right now. Let's see. Can you guys hear me? You can hear me? Let's see.
Yeah, something's going on with her mic, so she's going to try to reconnect. But so while we get Stephanie back on, she touched on some really important topics on Chicano studies, right? And I'm using Chicano studies with the X in the front. So some people, she talked about fear and how Chicano studies often is seen as like super radical, right? And part of Chicano studies and part of like the Chicano movement in the late 60s, early 70s was about like self-determination, right? I don't think that it's super radical to, think of a world where we stop separating families from each other. Like that's not radical. Like we just want to be with our kin. We want to be with our loved ones. And somehow the dominant narrative has become that we're asking too much by teaching our own history. We're asking too much by thinking about the history between the United States and all of Latin America. And then and this is why we talked about like the hemisphere, because there is a relationship between the United States empire and the Americas. But then that goes across like oceans, right, to the Pacific. into other parts of the world in the Middle East. And so I was thinking about this conversation in a hemispheric way, because that project with the US empire begins in Latin America, and then it goes global, right? We have a global empire in our hands. So I'm going to give it back to you, Chico, the question that you were asking, so y'all can get back on that roll.
No, I mean, thank you for, giving your 2 cents on that, because it is definitely necessary and part of this conversation. And Dr. A, back to you. Yeah, can you paint that picture of what a Mosque classroom is for those that have never taken a course, never been in there? I'll let you paint the picture, but and what's your favorite part about being a Mosque professor?
Well, I think every Mosque professor has their own type of way of teaching. I think you all probably know that based on all your experiences in the classroom. I mean, a class with me is, you're not going to get any lectures from me. That's for sure.
Yeah.
It's an anti-lecture classroom environment. No PowerPoints. That's not my style. I think that what a Mosque classroom is about, I mean, a physical space, and I'm teaching a grad class now, and it's really hard to see how we can do this online, but it is really about how do we come together and learn from one another. I try to see the students and myself as intellectual equals, right? Yeah, sure. I've had a lot of time to read a lot more than my students, but it doesn't mean I might have any intellectual capacity greater than my own students. And then my students have a lot of lived experiences that I don't. And they have experiences that are different from each other in the classroom. And then through our reading, we can bridge all of that together and learn from one another, and oftentimes develop a lot of new knowledge that we didn't have prior to being together. And oftentimes what happens is a lot of synergy comes about, and we can develop new ideas for how to improve things in the community, or we can develop potential answers to complex social problems, right? So, for example, I recall the last time I was in the classroom, which seems so long ago. It was, the anniversary of the Egg Couch Elsa walkout. So our students in the classroom, after reading, we said, okay, well, let's see how much has changed here at UTRGV, right? And so together they developed sort of like a list of demands, if you would, of things they wanted to see different at UTRGV based on their own research of things that were happening on campus. And I think that was an important thing to take place, because otherwise it may not have been something they would have really delved into and thought about otherwise. And that's, that's just an intro level course, so that's just an example. I just see it as coming together twice a week, reading, collaborating, discussing, and coming up with, new ideas, new questions that people hadn't thought of previously, and developing also new knowledge, and how do we use that knowledge in productive ways? I mean, I think that's how I envision those classes. And in spectacular moments, we can make real impacts in the community, or change in the community. Especially if we continue on, with those classes, and if we ask of our community what their needs are, their input. And I think that that's something we should always be keeping in mind when we're doing our work.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, I mean, community input is definitely important, especially if Mosque is already a discipline that many in the community don't know about, and it's for them. And many of the students are from the community. So, part of the things that I love the most about Mosque was just the interaction with community, the fact that you would host classrooms, in San Juan by the railroad tracks. We'd be painting it on a Saturday, and the camaraderie, the sharing of knowledge, and actually living it, putting theory into practice. And other friends of mine's peers, they couldn't relate. Their classes weren't like that. And the fact that Mosque is coming in handy in times like today, in times like these where we have to be quarantined or living in these historic moments. So it's something that you can not only use in your career, but also in your day-to-day life. But I'll pass it on to Dr. Ramirez if he wants to ask a question to you.
Sure. So I just wanted to just touch up on what you mentioned about like how you manage your class and like the non-lecture kind of thing. That's so cool. And that's one of the first things that I noticed about taking Mosque classes, that the power dynamics were different, right? The power dynamics wasn't this like, I'm the head of knowledge and I'm just dumping all my knowledge into you. It was this collective and collective minds just, pouring into the classroom. And I had never, like K through 12, and I didn't take my first Mosque class until graduate school. So I was 25. So, this was a 25-year-old person going, whoa, like this is a totally new way of schooling. My professors are seeing me as a human. At that point, you don't know that they're seeing you as an equal. You're still trained to see that power dynamic. But as the class kind of rolls on, you're like, wait a minute, I feel human, without having that sort of, I didn't have that sentence in my brain, but I remember feeling like I feel human in this class. I'm studying my abuelitos. Like my two grandparents were braceros, and I didn't know that until we took your class and we studied like the bracero historical trajectory. And my grandparents, and then I got to ask them, like, and they're like, oh yeah, like we used to go to Michigan and pick blueberries. Oh yeah, I lived in Falfurrias for like 5 years. Your dad was almost born there. You're like, yo, so our lives could have like changed. So yeah, it was just one of those things where in the classroom we felt human. And so taking your class actually opened up a whole new canon of literature, specifically like on language. That I was a sociology major and got my PhD in sociology. So language wasn't one of the themes or concepts that we really focus on. So that was really interesting, being a bilingual person and seeing Spanglish honored, seeing Spanglish like in an academic journal or a chapter in a book. And more than anything, it was just validating that you were like, you can submit whatever you need to submit in Spanglish. Like, it's cool. And now I do that, right? Like if my students want to write all pocho it up. Like it's all good. And so the work of Gloria Alzandua was introduced through your classes. And so I wanted to ask you, like, how does Chicano studies engage with the broader hemisphere as the whole hemisphere has collectively experienced and lived through a colonial past and present?
Yeah, well, I think that I think Chicanic studies really sets the groundwork for what people call decolonial studies, right? Because Chicanic studies is really about social justice. And so if you believe in social justice, really you're talking about humanizing what has been a dehumanizing education, right? Because everything, when you were talking, I was thinking, what we're talking about is humanizing the educational process, right? Humanizing the classroom, humanizing the curriculum, humanizing pedagogy, right? And what today, I mean, everything you're talking about is a decolonizing education, but really that's what Chicanic studies has been since the late 60s, right? Before people were talking about decoloniality, okay? And so, which I always find interesting because these are colonial, post-colonial, these are terms often used by Europeans first. So that's why I like to go back to Chicanic studies and stuff like that. And people in the hemisphere, in the Americas, if you will, these are things that people have been doing and that they are doing in other areas, in Peru, in Mexico, in Sudamerica, in terms of language, there have been theories such as transculturation that have talked about the mixing of languages since, the early, you're a sociologist. Fernando Ortiz was an anthropologist. I don't want to get all academic with language and language terms and, people, but I'm just saying that, these are ideas that have been around for a while, but it just takes people time to catch up on. So, we want to get rid of this horrible system that has dehumanized, Latinx and Chicanx students, right? And humanize the educational process because, we should honor our students' languages. And if we are educators in the field of Chicanx studies and Latinx studies, then you cannot possibly see that you are some sort of expert in anything, because you really aren't an expert of anything. Yeah, maybe you are well read in something, and maybe you've written X articles or books on something, but you have a lot to learn from people who have lived those things. You know what I mean? And so you have to come in as a person who's humble to the classroom, as someone prepared to learn from your students. I mean, and that's not to devalue all the knowledge you have, just like we value the knowledge our elders have, right? But to say that we're going to learn side by side, right? And that there's no one way of doing anything. So I think that that's really the thing, because if we accept the fact that Chicanx studies is based on social justice, then we have to conduct our classrooms in a way that is based on social justice as well, right? And so all the things you're talking about, Christian, are just, I never had a professor that did that. And I thought to myself, what would I have wanted differently? I'm gonna try to undo everything that was done to me, right? And so
we did the undoing. We did the undoing.
And so, that's part of it. Every time someone said to me that word doesn't exist, every time someone put a red mark on a paper with a big circle that told me I'm going to fail you if you do this again, because of something I wrote, or I don't know, or every idea I had that a professor told me, no, that's a really bad idea. Instead, why don't you write about this? I just was like, I would not do that. I would not do that to a student. I will let their minds run wild and see what they can come up with.
And sadly, in this pandemic, I still had students who were like, other professors are still conducting class and sort of their syllabus without understanding that we're living through like one of the worst pandemics that this group of humans has experienced, right? And so I'm like, how can you not be empathetic to the moment, to the human condition, to the students? And so it seems like a whole lot of professors are still operating in that, 70s, 80s sort of Reagan era sort of way. And I just wanted to ask really quickly, I'm not sure if you went to the Gloria Alzandua conference in Paris. Did you go to that? Can you talk a little bit about that and how like this Chicana theorist who is from the Rio Grande Valley is hosting a whole like conference out at the University of Paris? And what was that like? Take us there.
That was pretty wild, especially because you have a bunch of people really from Tejas there. There's a bunch of Tejanas out there and a bunch of people from California. It's pretty amazing to see, how the impact of someone like Gloria Anzaldúa can have on the world, right? And I think the best part of what I think I saw was not just the impact of it, but I felt like you have all of these Europeans. Yes, they had this conference for Anzaldúa, but they also gave the space up. I felt like they were giving the space up to all these folks really from the United States, and mostly Chicanas and Latinas from the United States. They created a safe space for them. They weren't there to like really talk to us about Anzaldúa. I think they really wanted to hear from us about Anzaldúa, although they did their presentations and stuff, right? And they really featured folks from the United States, featured Chicana artists, featured Chicana, scholars and activists. And so I thought that was really a beautiful thing that they did, and the willingness to learn. But I do find interesting and fascinating people from Europe and Argentina have long for many years now, for like 30 years, been fascinated with Chicanx and Latinx literature, especially the use of language. I don't totally understand the fascination. I think they enjoy the code switching, and maybe it's because they're not a monolingual society, and so but at the same time they have not been as adept to mixing languages the way we have been here, and they also deal with their own politics over immigration and stuff. And so I think maybe they have a lot to learn from the many years of Chicanic studies that have been going on. And so that's what I kind of got from the conference, is their willingness to learn, right, from us.
That is just so wild, because when I think of Europe, I just see a lot of borders. Like, it's just a whole mess of borders, and they were remade in after World War I and II, and like, so it's complex. And the fact that they're looking to our scholarship speaks to the minds, and so the minds that come from the Rio Grande Valley. So I just think that it's important to note that in this conversation that RGV minds are transforming education, they're transforming theory, they're transforming practice, not only in the RGV, and not only in Texas, not only in California, but globally in Latin America. We're in conversation with the Caribbean, we're in conversation with South America, and all over the place. I have students who have gone to the Philippines, and they're like, yo, they're kind of like Mexicans, and they have culturally, and some of the things that they go and learn on their study abroads from a Chicanx perspective. They're like, hey, there's a colonial relationship between that space and ours and our experiences. And so I just want to say that the RGV produces like genius, right, in its collectivity, and it's everywhere. And so the fact that we live in a highly militarized area of the world, sometimes we don't get to see that. What we do see in the media is a border wall discussion, or a discussion on border patrol or things like that. And so those were my questions and my contribution to this. So thank you to you, Dr. Alvarez, for engaging in this conversation. And I'll pass this on to Chico.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of Christian, we're just it's beautiful for us being from Corpus that we migrated down to the valley. Everybody's going up north, and we decided to take our academic journey down south to the Rio Grande Valley. Not really knowing what's over there, but knowing that just in going to school over here, our parents felt comfortable, like, oh, it's a Spanish-speaking community. It's immigrant community just like us. I know to this day, living here, creating what we're creating, I try to tell people, the gold is within us, the knowledge is within us. We don't have to. It's okay to leave and learn, but always apply those skills here in the Rio Grande Valley. Invest in ourselves here. It's just a beautiful place to live. So kind of what Christian said is that we produce so much knowledge here in the Rio Grande Valley. We were once your young, naive, curious students, and now we're the old heads. We're the older cousins, or like my brother says, the tios now. In what ways do you see your former students applying their Mosque background in their careers and in their lives?
Yeah, well, first thing I want to say is something that Christian mentioned, is that I've said many times, I've taught at a lot of places. I've taught at University of Michigan, University of Oklahoma, I've been at Michigan State visiting scholar. I've taught in California. I've taught in a lot of places. I'm St. Louis. And without a doubt, and I know sometimes people don't believe me, but the brightest students I've ever had, the best student, not just bright, the best students, the hardest working, the ones that turn in the assignments are at UTRGV. Okay. I mean, they're the best. I mean, I'd put them up against any of those top school students any day. and they'll kick their butts, anytime. I tell them that too, and I don't know if they believe me, but I'm saying it here. It's on the record, and it's the truth, And then I see it after they graduate, and I often tell students, it's not just what you do in terms of your career. It's what you do in your own personal life, how the degree, how Mexican American studies affects you personally, and those personal decisions you're going to be making once you graduate, or even when you're in school, not even before you graduate. You're going to make better decisions about who you're going to be friends with, how you're going to vote, what school you're going to send your child to, if you're going to take your child out of a classroom because you don't like what they're being taught, whether or not you're going to decide to keep talking or having this conversation with somebody because this is not a toxic conversation. Or if you decide, you know what, I'm going to sit down and talk to this person because, I think that there's something good that can come about with this. Or I'm going to decide to go to these, commission meetings, these city council meetings, right? So for me, right there, that's enough, right? For me, right, that is enough. And if it just starts there, it doesn't even go into the professional and the career space, that's enough, because that's life changing. That is life changing, and that's more important than any career decision that can be made, right? But and I know that students that take the classes, those are things that will change for them, and that is very important. And they don't have to get a major to do those things. They just need a couple classes, because these are things they're not exposed to. But if they get a major, it will certainly be even more beneficial. But we have so many students. I've had so many students. A lot of them have gone on, like Christian, to go and get their PhDs, and I'm really proud of them. Those of them who've done that, because that's something that's been their calling. But not everyone wants a PhD or needs a PhD. Other people have done good things in the community, that are doing things on social media platforms like yourself, Misa, and other people are educators, just, our school teachers. We've had a lot of school teachers come through in our program, and that's amazing, and they're not teaching Mexican American studies classes. They're history teachers, they're social studies teachers, they're English teachers, they're elementary school teachers. Some of them are working at banks, right? Some of them are doing all kinds of jobs. But to me, the thing that I'm most proud of is how it just transforms them personally in their personal lives. And to me, that's the biggest impact that I could make as an educator. Is in terms of their education, is what it can do for them personally.
And I think we get a little protective sometimes, and with the Mosque programs or Mosque programs in general, when we see them sort of skewing towards like a non-community based orientation, right? When we see them focusing on branding or focusing on the, just what kind of jobs are you going to get? Like, no, we're transforming lives. Like, we're creating community engaged folks who love, like, that's principle to the discipline. And I think, using the L word is like freaks people out in the academy, because it's not meant, that space isn't meant for that. But our families and our community has taught us the total opposite, is that no, you lead with love. And so when we do see it kind of taking a different turn, we get a little protective, and it's like, hey, no, we're about the community, for the community, right? And so I just wanted to throw that little piece out there, and just so folks who are out there who aren't engaged as much with Mosque, you have people who really, really care about the discipline, and we want to take care of it, because we know that the next generation, there's a little TikTok Gen Z generation, like they're already like really exposed to some of this stuff. So it's an exciting time to be an academic and see, okay, these are the middle schoolers, these are the high schoolers that are going to enter into the academy. How do we re-engage and reimagine Mosque with this, like, still being centered on love?
No, you're right. I mean, it's very interesting because this Gen Z generation, you know, a lot of them are real woke, you know, teens, you know. I mean, I've got Gen Z teens in my home, and it's scary. It's scary how much they know. I mean, it's scary in a good way, but then I'm like, oh my God, what else do they know? But it's astonishing because at their age, I mean, I didn't know anything. I didn't know nothing. I didn't know any of this stuff. And they know a lot, you know. They know a lot, and you know, I always say they're going to save us. I don't tell them that because I don't want to put that kind of pressure on them, but the future looks very bright. But my concern is, are they going to encounter educators like you say, Christian, that are going to come at them with love, you know, and or are they going to come into a generation, the Generation Xers like myself, you know, that are in the academy now, that don't have that appreciation for the knowledge they have, you know, and are going to come at them with this very old model of teaching that doesn't embrace who they are, because Gen Z is also extremely diverse. You know, it's the most diverse student population that probably has existed to date. And so that is something I think, you know, and I'm not just talking about the Valley, I'm talking about around the country, and seeing what we have seen recently, especially at the Capitol, and that heightened white supremacy happening around. I think Chicanic studies and ethnic studies really needs to start coming center stage. We need to center those pedagogies. We need to center the experiences of people of color as much as we can right now, because these Gen Zers are about to enter into college. And so if we can do that in K through 12 now, and we can start doing that at the college level while we have some, you know, a not white supremacist at the level of, you know, of a Trump in place, we need to start working on building that capacity now to make sure that these students will have some sense of belonging. Because I think if not, you know, we're in for a very rude awakening in the next 5-10 years, because otherwise it's going to be a real big clash happening.
So we got a lot of work to do. That's one. And I think craft cultura is a nice, for now, you know, a bridge. And we don't know what this is going to become. We don't know what craft cultura is going to become in 5-10 years. But we hope, right, that by the time that generation gets into college, that craft cultura will have some sort of relationship that bridges community to the academy.
Yeah, well, you know, that's what we're attempting to do here at Craft, is be that bridge in the community. And had it not been for educators like yourself, Dr. Alvarez, and older brothers like my brother, Christian Ramirez, I was very fortunate to have both of you in my life. There might not have ever been a Craft Cultura, but that's the purpose. We don't know what it's going to evolve into, but it's our job to continue to, you know, raising the bar, asking those questions, engaging with friends, family members, disengaging with those toxic environments, and creating spaces of love and justice for all of us, especially here in the Valley, where we're geographically disconnected from the rest of the country. But, you know, we're attempting to connect with those that are doing the work behind the scenes, in front of the scenes. We need every avenue, all the roles that we need everybody right now. And, you know, Gen Z will save us, but Dr. Alvarez, you saved us and many students that were lost on their academic journey. So we want to just thank you, applaud you, just give you your flowers while you're here. And, you know, just as a little thank you for being our guest today. We're going to wrap up soon. Just as a little gift, you know, we'll mail it to you or curbside deliver. I'm going to give you a T-shirt, a little Craft Cultura T-shirt, a little self-care packet, a book by a Native American author, Tommy Orange, out of Oakland, a little craft sticker, and a little candle That way you have your little self-care packet.
Thank you.
We're still in this pandemic, and but it's because of professors like you that allowed us to really go inward and reflect when we were forced to, and not only reflect but create in that process. So thank you for joining us today, giving us some of your time, and we hope we can continue having these conversations, Doc.
Oh no, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the very kind, generous gifts. And I don't think I saved you. I'm sure you saved yourself. I just provided a space in which you could do it. I would say that, and where it was possible for you to do it for yourself. So, I think that's more appropriate kind of way to say it.
Oh, you saved me from some bad classes. Let me tell you that. There's some ones that are reaching, but thank you. Thank you.
Chico, Juventina wants to know, can you explain a little bit more about craft cultura and what it is? I think that's a really good question.
That's a great question.
It's an evolving sort of answer.
Right. And that's a question that I have to revisit every month, sometimes daily, because it's something new. And, if there's anything, if the short answer is that we're a collective, a Chicanx, Latinx collective, here in the Rio Grande Valley and beyond. And what we do is we create these spaces where we use our different skills and apply them in the community, directly in the community. So a lot of us, we already have the cultura in you. Now, the only question is, what's your craft? What are you good at? How can you help? How can you engage neighbors, family, friends? In these discussions that at many times they're provided only to those that are in higher ed. And what we try to do is, make them accessible to the community. So Craft Cultura, we're a collective. We have folks that are counselors, educators, graphic designers, coaches. So if you're looking to be in a social justice-based organization in the Rio Grande Valley, feel free to reach out to Craft Cultura. We try to make it as fun as possible. And we also have different events such as our monthly book club. We've had events on mental health. We've even had a cumbia party. We've had pop-up shops, art nights, registered voters. But Craft Cultura, it's an acronym that stands for Creating Real Art for Tomorrow. And many times we're told that we're not real art, real knowledge. So that's where it comes from, creating real art for tomorrow. We are real. We are the experts. So our elders are, and we're just trying to pave the way for the next generation. So feel free to reach out to us if you want a certain discussion, this year, or want to join Craft Cultura. We're more than happy to, engage. And Lupe Martinez commented, I did not have the opportunity to have Dr. Alvarez as a professor, but I did have Dr. Ramirez. So thank you for bringing this world to me. Shout out
to Lupe. What's up, Michigan State? And yeah, so in my classes were predominantly, I would say 80 to 90% Latino, with a good chunk of those students being from the Rio Grande Valley, right? So a lot of my students from Donna, Westlaco, PSJA area, and then there was like a whole group of other kids from Florida, and they were migrant farm worker students from Florida, and then other students that were migrant farm workers from Michigan. And so so Lupe, I remember that time, and this is who I got. This is the model, like, blueprint of what it's like, what it is to be a humanizing professor and a humanizing experience in the classroom. So
yeah, we got to work together to bring this to K through 12 here in the Valley. Yeah. That's what we got to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, anyone up for it? Let's move. Let's talk. Let's figure it out.
Yeah.
That's I think the biggest thing to do, is really make sure these young kids have this possibility.
Absolutely.
Right. And, that's what we're going to try and continue to do. And, we just send our love to you, Dr. A, to all the kids, to Jose, the family.
Thank you.
Our love with them, and our love to all the viewers that tuned in today on Super Bowl Sunday. This is our own Super Bowl, Chicanx Super Bowl. And let's continue building these next 4 years and this decade. We can study history, but we're also in history. And I'm just proud of these two individuals right here and all those that tuned in that are doing the work. So thank you to everybody. Thank you, Dr. Alvarez. Thank you, Christian. We'll have some more discussion soon.
All right, bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.